Hello, brothers, sisters, friends. Welcome to our midweek discussion. Today, the title of my lesson is Kueh Lapis. Kueh Lapis. What an interesting title. Hold that for a moment. I'll come back to you. Why we have this title, Kueh Lapis. During this time of COVID-19, Movement Control Order in Malaysia, as they call it, MCO. Singapore, Circuit Breaker. America, Lockdown. Different names. A lot of people have been trying different things. And I know that the brothers and sisters in our church, they too have been trying different things, especially in the area of cooking. One of my close brothers, Leo, he has during this time cooked over 20 different type of dishes. He loves to cook. When I was talking to him the other day, he sent me all the photos and it looks so delicious. I wish I could go to his house and have a meal with him. Then I discover Sister Yo-Yo. Wow. She sent some pictures to my wife and it looks incredible. Mouth-watering. Sambal sotong. Curry prawns. Can you taste it? MCO. Circuit breaker. When you going to finish? Vaccine. When you going to come so that we can visit each other's home and eat? Cannot wait for that. Then another sister, Angie, she cooked nasi lemak, a favorite among Malaysian. And I discovered that even one of the sisters, you know what she did that was really amazing? She tried to make a cake using a rice cooker. Wow. Of course, I didn't get to see the cake. I believe it was quite successful. Amazing, isn't it? One of the things that Patrice wanted to make is a special cake. You guess it. Kueh Lapis. Well, this is not her cake. We bought it from the store. But she really wants to make this cake. It's not easy. Kueh Lapis. Do you know how to make this Kueh Lapis? They call it layered cake. The reason why it's called layered cake, if you can see, there are many different layers in the cake. And what did they do? What do they do to make this many different layers? Basically, in order to make the layer cake, Kueh Lapis, they have to cook layer by layer by layer by layer. So they make the batter, put it in a pan, then take the pan with the batter, put it in the oven for 5 to 10 minutes so that that layer can be cooked. Then after that, they take it out. They put another layer of batter. And then they put it into the oven again. Another 5 minutes. So that the batter can be cooked. And then they take it out and put another layer of batter again. And then put it into the oven to cook for another 5 minutes. Wow, that is very time consuming. Tedious. A lot of hard work and sweat. But amazing Kueh Lapis. Very tasty. Great taste. If you ever come to Malaysia or Singapore, for those of you who are not in this region, you need to try Kueh Lapis. You will love it. Totally amazing. Kueh Lapis. Yum, yum. When I think about Kueh Lapis, I cannot help but think about our own faith and spirituality. just as Kueh Lapis have that many different layers of batter, our faith also have many different layers. And we can slowly grow in our faith to be just like Kueh Lapis. And when we reach spiritual maturity, it will be like Kueh Lapis. Yum, yum. So we're going to see what are the different layers of faith. We're going to look at Peter, our favorite disciple, and how he grew in his layers of faith. The first layer that Peter had was his faith to believe and follow. If you read with me in John chapter 1, verse 41 to 42, it says here, the first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, we have found the Messiah, that is the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, you are Simon, son of John, and you will be called Cephas, which when translated is Peter. This was the very first time Peter met Jesus. For Peter, Jesus was somebody new. Who is this? Who is this person that Andrew is saying Messiah? Let me get to know him. Peter did not know Jesus. They hardly met. They have never spent time before. But through their spending time, through their time together, Peter grew in his first layer of faith, where he started to believe and then later on followed Jesus. And if you read in Mark chapter 1 and Matthew chapter 4, you'll find that Jesus at a later time called them to leave their nets to follow him. And after Peter has developed that faith to believe, he slowly grew in his faith to follow, where he was willing to let go of everything and be wholeheartedly to follow Jesus. That's the first layer of faith. Faith to believe and follow. What is the second layer of faith that we can grow in? Faith to obey. Let's look at Luke chapter 5, verse 3 to 5. Here we find Jesus got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into the deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Peter has been fishing the whole night, and as usual, not much fish. So Simon answered, he kind of complained to Jesus, Master, we worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. Peter must have been so frustrated. Who is this guy, Jesus, trying to tell me go fish again? But I appreciate Peter. You know what was his response? He said, but because you said so, I will let down my nets and catch the fish. Wow. Slowly, here we find Peter added another layer, a layer of faith to obey. Even though he couldn't understand what Jesus was trying to teach him or tell him to do, it was totally out of the ordinary. But Peter decided, because Jesus said so, I will have faith to obey. So brothers, sisters, as you look at Peter, you got to ask yourself, do you have a faith to obey? We first started off with the faith to believe and to follow. Then now we need to also grow in our faith to obey. Where when we read the Bible, if we see this is what the Bible says, we say, God, because you say so, I will obey. What is the next layer of faith that we can add on? In Matthew chapter 16, in verse 13 to 16. It says here, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say it's Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Here is Peter. Simon answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. So here we see Peter moved on from having just faith to obey, but he added another layer. Faith to proclaim Christ, where he was bold to say, yes, not only do I believe, not only do I obey, but I'm going to proclaim you to the world that Jesus, he's the Messiah, he's the Christ. He grew in his layer of faith. What's the next layer of faith that Peter grew in? Faith to get up again. You know, as Peter followed Jesus, there was many hardship, difficulty, and trials. And we know Peter, he's quite loudmouth, and there were times, many times he fell. And so at the very end, at the cross, Peter fell very hard. So hard that we all wonder, can he get up again? In fact, Peter was so discouraged. We're going to read in John chapter 21, verse 1 to verse 3. It says here, afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael from Cana of Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. They said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Can you see the discouragement of Peter? You know, Jesus died, yes, resurrected, and he even saw the resurrection of Christ. But what was Peter doing? He went back fishing. He was so discouraged. In fact, he influenced the rest of the brothers. Let's go fishing. Come, let's do it. But you know what happened in John chapter 21? I appreciate Jesus. So merciful, filled with grace and love. Jesus came and called Peter and cooked breakfast for everybody. And then at the very end, Jesus challenged Peter one last time, where Jesus said to Peter, do you love me more than this? Jesus said that 3 times. And Peter replied 3 times, you know, Lord, that I love you. And at the very last time when Jesus challenged him, do you love me more than this? The Bible said that Peter was very hurt. He was cut to the heart. But he rose up again. He decided, yes, I got to do the right thing. So here we find that Peter added to his next layer of faith, the faith to get up again. You know, brothers and sisters, we all have trials. We all have difficulties. Even with this COVID-19 situation, I'm sure many of you have went through difficult times where some of you might be losing a little bit of faith. Some of you might not be as godly. But you know what? Like Peter, we can add on to our faith, this layer of faith, to get up again. Finally, Peter add on a new layer of faith, which is what? Faith to make a difference. In Acts chapter 1 and Acts chapter 2, that's where we can see Peter really rise up, call the brothers and sisters. They prayed together. And in Acts chapter 2, many people came to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast of Pentecost. The Bible says the Spirit came to the disciples and they spoke in many languages. And the people were astonished, amazed, but some started to tease them and said, "These men are drunk." But you know what Peter did? He stood up and made a difference. In verse 14 it says that then Peter stood up with the 11, raised his voice and addressed the crowd. "Fellow Jews and all you who live in Jerusalem, let me explain this to you. Listen carefully to what I have to say. These men are not drunk, as you suppose. It's only 9 in the morning. No, this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel." Wow. Peter was so courageous, was so bold, he was so powerful. He went on to make a difference, to proclaim the gospel of Christ to all the foreigners that was in Jerusalem at that time. Peter had that faith to make a difference. Brothers, sisters, we need to slowly grow in our faith. Add on layer by layer. First by believing, then by obeying, then by proclaiming. And then, as we go through trials and difficulty, get up again. And after getting up, make a difference. Then, our faith will be just like this Kueh Lapis. Should I eat it? Later on. I'll eat it later on. Yum, yum. Delicious. We will grow in spiritual maturity before the Lord. So the question we got to ask ourselves is, are you adding on those layers of faith? Just like making this Kueh Lapis, it takes hard work. It takes time. It takes sweat. But the end product is a wonderful, delicious piece of cake. So what did Peter do? What helped Peter to add on those layers of faith? These are some things that you find as you read the gospel. Number one, most importantly, Peter decided to follow Jesus. That's the most important thing. We all need to start with that. Please make a full decision to follow Jesus wholeheartedly. And then, secondly, Peter was willing to be what? Challenged and called higher by Jesus and the disciples around him. He was humble. He was not proud against the challenges that Jesus gave him. He was willing to take the challenge. You know, brothers, sisters, when people challenge you, are you willing to take those challenges? Or do you say, please don't touch my life? And not only that, he was vulnerable about his struggles and wasn't afraid to look bad in front of other people. He talked about it. He confessed his weaknesses so that he can grow. And then I love this one. He had the 12, the band of brothers who was always there to strengthen him. You know, brothers, sisters, friends, we need the band of brothers. And in our church, we all have that band of brothers. But the question comes is, are you committed to that band of brothers or sisters so that you can be strengthened? As disciples, it is very hard to grow by yourself. But when you have other people to push you, other people to help you, other people to pace with you, your faith can grow into maturity. And then, when he was knocked down, many times, he stood up again. He had that faith to get up again. And finally, most importantly, most importantly, he held on to the hand of Jesus. He never let go of Jesus even until the very end. That is the most important, brothers and sisters. When all else fails, hold on to the hand of Christ. Because when Jesus reaches out, when He holds your hand, when He pulls you, you will have the strength to get up and to be able to add on to those layers of faith. And at the end of this lesson, I will pose some reflection question. Look at the question, take some time to think about it, and then you can discuss with the group what you think about those reflection questions. And then after that, you can pray together as a group, encourage each other on, so that you can add on to those layers of faith and be a Kueh Lapis. Have that Kueh Lapis of faith. Amen.